Greetings everyone, I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I am continuing to trudge through Season 1 of Game of Thrones. We're almost at the end. We're now in the penultimate episode, Episode 9, Baelor. Like the previous episode, it is directed by Alan Taylor. And this is the episode that set the tone for the rest of the show in the fact that in the penultimate episode of the season, something major happens at the end. And I think it goes without saying for even those who have not watched the show, this is the one where at the very end we check another box off the Sean Bean dies and everything he's in list. Now that's not entirely true, but a good portion of the time it is, or at least a lot of his major roles are. And it was one of the things that was majorly spoiled in the memes that I saw before I marathon watched all of the first 4 seasons in preparation for Season 5. Back at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. Now, before I get too far into it, just a reminder, if you want to support the channel, both the Patreon and PayPal links are down below. If you want to continuously support the channel, go the Patreon route. You'll gain access to videos early, and you'll also be able to suggest topics for future videos. If you just want to do one-off support or one-off requests, go the PayPal route. Either way, your support is appreciated. Baelor. Alan Taylor, one thing I don't think I mentioned last time is he would also go on to direct Thor the Dark World. So it's debatable whether you could say his career went up. After that, it seems like he just did mostly television stuff, but a lot of the backstage stuff with Marvel at that time, you kind of see why. Now, this episode I have broken down into 4 parts, and I have a good amount of trivia at the end. Now, last time, I couldn't figure out if it was this episode or the next episode that had the Tyrion fight. It's this one. I didn't actually go back and reread the chapter, but I got a synopsis of what we're missing, and most of it I can actually talk about from memory, because based on what I have in my notes. Because I actually have a good amount of notes this time. Now, synopsis-wise, we're going to start up above the wall. Now, the major thing that happens here is that Jon receives Longclaw from Jorah Mormont for saving him in the previous episode. Now, as I noted there, the White was not actually trying to actively kill him. It was going towards him when Jon ran into it. So his miraculously saving the Lord Commander isn't as remarkable and last minute as the previous episode, as the book, excuse me. But it's still there. Jorah, being a Northman and very loyal to the Starks. Even though Jon is technically a bastard, he is still a Stark by blood. No matter which one of the theories you go through, Stark blood does run through his veins. I mean, he does have the Stark look. And Jorah is gonna repay Jon for it, and he gives Jon Longclaw, the Mormont ancestral Valyrian steel sword. Now, Valyrian steel, for the most part, does not have the same look it has in the books. As I think I brought up before, it's more like an ashen gray in the book. It has a very ethereal quality about it. Here, they just make it look like some special steel with the exception of ice. I think to make ice look different. I think it's kind of the Sting quality from the Lord of the Rings books, where it seems to be the only elvish blade that glows. Even though Glamdrain and Orcrish should also be glowing at different points, but goes without saying. Oh, the whole thing with the hand is a little different. It's not as bad, so there's that. How everybody reacts when Jon comes in with the sword is about the same. We're like, let's see it. Sword, sword, sword. And then when he pulls it out, they're like, yeah. Of course, Jon hears the news about Robb, about calling the Bounders and all that, and he's a little upset. Now, since he grew up with Robb, because they're of equal or almost equal age, they're best friends, you can see why he's a little upset that he can't go to war. It's like, I go to the Night's Watch, I say my vows, and then something happens. Goes without fail. I could be there. Now, I'll say, as much as Kat hates Jon, with everything that's going to happen in the next couple of seasons, I think she probably would have preferred Jon being around him at this point. But then, at least in the show version, because she would know that if there's anyone that's not going to betray Robb, it's his own brother. Because of how duty-bound Jon is, because of the fact he is Ned's son. Even with R plus E, because Jen and all the other one, Ned is the one that raised him, so for all intents and purposes, he is his father. It's say, he may have been your father, boy, but he wasn't your daddy moment. The book Cat would probably have tried to kill him at the first pass, but at least based on how her chapters are written. Never know, it could have been the same thing. There's that whole thing with George R. R. Martin not understanding why people hate Cat as much as they do. He's upset. Everybody can see it. And who has a talk with him? None other than Maester Aemon. And this is one of my favorite scenes in the whole show. And it's also a very great scene in the book. Because we get the love and duty talk. Where Maester Aemon talks with Jon about why the Night's Watch vows are there. It's so they will not love, because love is the death of duty. And he asks Jon a very interesting question. What would you do, what would your Lord Father do if he was split between love on one hand and duty on the other? And Jon's answer is he would do what is right. Which, keep that in mind, because that's going to play into Ned's arc at the end of this episode and a lot of his backstory. And Aemon's answer is, Lord Stark is one man in 10,000. Not most of us are not so strong. Which, the reason I say that goes into Ned's arc is the whole thing about him living his lies for years and all that. They don't bring that up in the show, but that's something that goes through Ned's mind when he's in the cells. And a lot of fans are still wondering, what lies are you talking about? Is it connected back with Jon? Is it something else? Is it Ashara? There's a lot of possibilities, and until George finishes the last 2 books and we actually get confirmation one way or another, we don't know yet. Now Jon snaps at Maester Aemon because it's like, nobody knows! He's my brother and I can't do anything. And Aemon just laughs at him. And this is where we find out Maester Aemon's identity. I just love this speech from him. Where he's like, yeah, the gods were cruel when they tested my vows. They waited until I was old. And he goes and talking about it. Now, the first time I watched this episode, I had not read the books. So I did not know Aemon's secret. And along with other show-only watchers, I was just as shocked. And I just love how this plays it. Now, watching it again with that knowledge, I'm like, yeah, this adapts it seemed very well. And just the way that it plays and just the look on Jon's face when he's starting to put together 2 and 2, he's like, wait a minute. So that's who you are. And then when he says, you're Aemon Targaryen. The way that Aemon acts after that, you can tell that it's like, it's been a long time since I've heard that name. It's a Obi-Wan Kenobi. That's a name I have not heard in a long time moment. Or it's like, yeah. And of course, that also raises the question of, why didn't he get killed then? I mean, Robert was on his whole kill all Targaryens thing. Did he forget about Mr. Aemon? Did he not care since he was double sworn to not do anything? Or was he because he was old? There's a lot of things there. You know at least somebody. At least Pycelle, that bootlicker, would probably know. And he probably decided not to do anything. He probably brought it up with Tywin, and Tywin's like, he is a member of the Night's Watch and a maester. He is of no concern to us. Now, with all these things, telling his story, and of course the whole love and duties thing, Aemon gives Jon some wise words here. I will not tell you to stay or go, only that you must choose and live with it. Now, combined with everything, it gets you thinking, what's Jon gonna do? And when you think about Ned and saying he's 1 man in 10,000, what will he do? Because based on everything that's happened, he's gonna have to choose. What's he gonna do? Is he gonna go with duty on one hand, love on the other, or is he gonna do what Jon said, and that's do what's right? And then when you apply it to Jon's arc, that's gonna come up with the next episode, he's gonna have to choose one way or the other. Across the narrow sea, we see Khal Drogo is in a worse shape than we left him. Last time we saw Mary Mazdur, which is the name of the woman that offers to heal his wound, he's out of it. Now, his wound is infected and he falls from his horse, which in Dothraki culture is not a good thing because, as one of his blood riders says, a Khal who cannot ride is no Khal. Dany tries to ease it by getting them to camp for the night. That same blood rider is questioning her authority, like, I do not take orders from you. Khal Drogo will hear this. Now, he listens for now, but you can tell he's basically thinking if he lives. Oh yeah, once he dies and we have a civil war to determine the next Khal, you're first on my kill list. Now, Khal slowly is going worse and worse as the infection goes. Now, the show makes you wonder, did Mary Mazdur fudge her help of it, or did something else happen? Now, in the books, this is all Khal Drogo's fault, because she puts a bandage over it with some healing stuff, and he decides that he doesn't like it, rips it off, and rubs it with mud. It's one of those things that if you're his mother, you want to give Khal Drogo a putazo like no other. You want to bounce off the walls, you're going to hit him so hard. It's like, you idiot. But of course, when you look at it through the mindset of a medieval culture, especially one that does not understand science and all that, you could kind of see why Drogo did it, because it's not masculine to do that, but it's one of those things like, you're letting your masculinity kill you? Okay. Now, Mary Mazdur offers to heal him, but it's going to be blood magic. A life for a life. And she gets Khal Drogo's horse and starts doing this weird ceremony involving slicing its throat, chanting, and all that. Now, once Dany leaves the tent, and she's told not to go back in there for any reason, you can tell the use of blood magic is really affecting everybody there. They're like looking at him. If this was like a Christian society, or they'd be crossing themselves and giving the evil eye. Any other type of society, they'd be doing what the Dothraki are doing. That same Blood Rider from earlier feels he's had enough of this. He's going to go and kill Mary Mazdur. Now Jorah decides he's going to interfere. He's already got his armor on because Dany told him to. And he tells him no further, Horse Lord, and draws his weapon. And they have a little one-on-one, or to use my LARPer terminology, to nerd myself a little bit more here, they have PvP combat. Now the Blood Rider manages to get a nick on Jorah's cheek, and they continue fighting. And I just love the movements here. You can definitely tell the two different fighting styles and get a sense of how skilled the combatants are. The Dothraki is a little bit more wild, a little bit, it's not as trained as, say, Westerosi would be, or even the Braavosi. It's eccentric, it's wild, but it fits the weapon that they're using and the fighting style where they're unarmored, and it's all about speed and getting your opponent at the right time. Whereas Jorah's a little bit more grounded. You can tell he's moving a little slower both due to his age and the fact he's wearing breastplate armor. But then you also see where the two different fighting styles and used to fighting one type of opponent plays against you, because the Dothraki goes to hit him in the side and Jorah's wearing plate armor. So it's probably going to hurt a little bit in the inside just from the impact, but Jorah catches it. And now he has no weapon, so his only way of being able to dodge what's about to happen is to let go of the weapon and roll, and then he has no weapon. And since he doesn't do that, Jorah slices him at the head, and now he is dead. And with all this going on, Dany starts going into labor. Whether it's premature or not, it's up to how you look at it. I'd say it's a little bit premature. The midwives, because of all the stuff going on and all the thing with the blood magic, are refusing to come, so Jorah takes Dany into the tent, despite what Mary Mazdur said. Now, from what it's going to follow, makes you wonder, did the baby also play a little price in the blood magic that's following? Did the baby die due to premature labor, or is there something else going on? Was it a little bit more Robert's plan? There's a lot of speculation about that in the books, but in the show, it looks like it's going to be a combination of the premature labor and what we will see in the next episode. In the Riverlands, we're mainly following two stories. One is Robb and his group, and the other one are the Lannisters. Now, with Robb's story, the Starks have reached the Twins, which is the seat of House Frey. House Frey, one of the larger houses, all because its acting lord, the aged Lord Walder Frey, called by Cat's father the late Walder Frey, due to the fact that he showed up to the battle that ended Robert's Rebellion late, when it was apparent which side would win. He's an old guy who has had many, many wives, and because of that he has many, many legitimate children and just as many illegitimate children. I don't think they bring it up in the show, but in the books they joke about it by saying Lord Walder is the only lord that could issue an army out of his loins. That's how many he has. And when we actually do see him in this part, we do get a sense of it, but it does kind of sell it short. And in the books, there is a lot of speculation of what's going to happen with him, like a civil war, because of all the different cliques within Lord Walder's children. Now, he comes across as not really liking his kids in the show and in the book, but he's being a little stern because he's a lord. He has to be like that. But it becomes obvious he does love his children. He's trying to do what's best for them in his own weird way. Now, once he dies, a lot of fans speculate about the Civil War, because once he's gone, that whole thing holding the house together is going to go away. To use a real-world comparison, think about what happened after Queen Victoria died. In the lead-up to World War I, a lot of the monarchs were related. Like the King of England and the Tsar were cousins. And if you look at them in the photos, you can definitely see the family resemblance. And then they're related to a lot of the other monarchs. King Leopold, there's a lot of relationships there. Now, when Victoria was alive, she'd be the aunt or the grandmother of a lot of these ones. So if something happened, it'd be like, oh no, yeah, you do that, grandmother's going to do something. What's she going to do? Grandmother walks in. Probably not like that, just standing all noble. If it was a Mexican grandmother, we all know, would have been like... I'm not going to actually throw it. I don't want to hurt this camera, but you get the picture. That was accident. Yeah, but once that went out of the way, all it took was the right issue, the right powder keg, and the right amount of time to pass before, boom, war explodes between them. Even though it could have been prevented with the right talk at the right time. Now, when Lord Walder goes, powder keg, there's a civil war between the different factions, all because the Freys decide to faction and just hang out with whoever's descended from certain wives or whatnot. And of course, certain sons being chill, some of the older ones, and then once they die during the war and the line of succession changes, we could see where things are going to go. But some of it is stuff I'm not going to bring up here, considering that it's not going to come into play until a couple more seasons, and we'll talk about that when we get to those seasons. Now, Robb decides he's going to go in, but Kat interrupts and goes, I'll go. I'm the daughter of his liege lord. He'll never harm me. He's known me since I'm a little girl. And when she goes in, he can see that even though he is a little respectful, Lord Frey is a little uncouth. Like he's in there groping his wife openly in front of her, talking to her a little uncouth. And then he yells at his sons, both his heir and a illegitimate one. And I love what he yells at his illegitimate son. He's like, do I need lessons of courtesy from you, bastard? And then talking about what his mother still would be if he hadn't squirted her. Then he like does the courtesy, and they talk in private about it. And you really do see a lot of Lord Walder's resentment about how Holster Tully did not come to his last few weddings. And the fact that he never offered to marry any of his children to hers. Now, Holster only had the 3 children, and one of them is still unmarried. The son, the heir. Whereas Lord Frey has a lot of children to get rid of, to marry off. Now, some of this is a little political because he wants to try to nudge his way in. But some of it is also he's trying to make sure his children are well cared for. And he knows certain houses are probably more likely to care for him. Now, he sees an opportunity here and he's not going to pass it up. Part of this comes out through the dialogue about, oh, your oath and all that. Oh, yes, I remember swearing oath and oath. And part of this is a little bit of a precursor and foreshadowing to dialogue we're going to get out of Jaime, I think next season. I don't think it's in the next episode. Off-screen, Kat manages to negotiate their crossing. Now, the reason they have to negotiate it is because the Twins is a fortress castle that is a bridge that's on the river. It's the only way to cross that one for miles, and it's a pretty deep river. They could try to take it, but at what cost? They could lose a lot of their forces, and every drop of bloodshed and every person that goes is one less person to fight the Lannisters, and they know that. So that's why they negotiated. And it's a pretty steep price. Robb has to squire one of Walder's sons. Arya must marry another one of his sons, which you all know Arya's not going to like that. And then Robb may marry one of Lord Walder's daughters once the war is over. And he gets to pick the daughter. Now, in retrospect, those of you who have read the books and seen the show know that what's going to happen with Robb before that. And that he probably should have looked at them first and then decided and married there and then consummate later. That would have been the smart thing to do. But alas, he didn't. And thinking like it's the phrase, they're all going to be... I'm not saying that. That's there thinking. I mean, also based on the fact that Cat doesn't fully answer his question when he asks how they look. Like, there are some that are, you know, he's hesitating. And the nice little touch there is you could tell Theon is enjoying this a little bit. Like, oh, I'm going to rib the crap out of Robb later. Definitely showing their best friends and kind of brother figures, at least here in the show. The book is a little different, if I remember right. Now, with the Lannisters, we see the preparation for the battle that's about to happen. And during this preparation, we are introduced to Shae, the prostitute, who is Tyrion's companion for the next couple seasons. Now, their relationship is a little better in the show than it is in the book, because in the books we find out eventually Shae was just using him, which Tyrion knows she is, but it doesn't hurt any less when what happens in season 4 is going to happen. In the show, it kind of looks more like they do have a genuine relationship, which adds a little bit more tragedy to everything when you think about it. Especially considering the backstory we're about to find out about him here. Because during their little drinking game, which is kind of like Never Have I Ever, kind of interesting to see that Westeros even has their equivalent of it, we find out Tyrion's backstory involving his marriage, where he was once married to a peasant girl that him and Jaime met on chance on the road, saved her for some rapers. Tyrion took her to an inn, they shared some wine and a chicken. This is when he was 16, so he wasn't as used to the alcohol. They had a night of passion, and he was in love. They married, and they were fine for a while, until the Septon that married him sobered up, squealed to Tywin. And Tywin had Jaime tell the truth that she was a prostitute, and he had his men have their way with her, with Tysha, in front of Jaime, and they paid her silver. Now, the show cuts out one thing about this, and I can kind of see why they decided to, but, you know, to try to make Tyrion look better. I mean, they changed Tyrion a lot in other ways to make him look better than he is in the books. You can argue back and forth on it. But there's one detail I think they should have kept in here, but in retrospect, considering that they cut out this part later in season 4, I can kind of see why they cut it out here, but the added detail is Tywin made Tyrion take her as well. And at the end of it, instead of a silver, he had her paid in a gold coin, because he's a Lannister and they're worth more. Now, if they had told that right before Bronn's line, I would have killed the man that did that. That would have made that a little bit stronger. It's still strong as is, especially with how it's played. But it would have been so much stronger with that little bit. And this speech, Peter Dinklage plays it excellently. And I can see why he submitted this episode to the Emmys and how it got him his first Emmy Award for supporting actor in a drama series. He would get multiple wins and nominations after this, and he won 4 for the show alone. But this is the first one, and I can see why. Just the pain and him trying to hide it in that episode, in his face and in his words, his vocal tone as he's telling the speech. The next day, the battle begins. Tyrion is knocked out by the hill tribes accidentally. Now, I love how he's trying to gather them all, saying all their names, and then he forgets one, and like, "And painted dog, and painted dogs." There's a rallying, and then they charge and knock him over. Now, as I've mentioned before, budget was a little bit of an issue with the show early on, and this is one thing they had to cut in order to get the season made properly. Now, watching this the first time, I never really noticed that anything was cut out, but then when I read the book, I'm like, so there was a battle. And then finding out about the budget issues, it's like, it makes sense. Now, it would have been nice to see the battle. It would have made the episode a little bit longer. It would have been the 2 penultimate things instead of the 1. While it still does happen in this episode, it's off screen. I can see why. Now, this ties back into Rome, their previous big show, where a couple battles they just did in a cheap way like this, and be like, tell him Caesar has won. Like, kind of feels like a cheat there. Here, you could say it feels a little bit like a cheat as well. But with the budget issue and how they do it, it works just as well that we're seeing it through Tyrion's perspective. And it kind of is a callback to Tolkien again, because Tolkien is one of George's influences. That's kind of like the Battle of 5 Armies, where we see just enough of it, and then once Bilbo gets knocked out, we only hear about the rest of it later. But the only difference is here, we see the beginning of it, or the beginning charge of the hill tribes, and we wake up after the fact and find out what happened. That it was only 2,000 men that were basically sent as a feint to their deaths. Think of it like sacrificing a pawn in chess. You sacrifice your pawn in order to capture your main goal. When they take the feint and go for the pawn, you reveal your real move and you get them in check or take the main piece you were looking for. And that main piece they were looking for happened to be Jaime, because the main host went to go attack the host Jaime was with, and they captured him. Now Jaime tries to goad Robb into a one-on-one combat, but Robb's a little too smart for that. And he decides, no, if we play it your way, Kingslayer, you'd win. We're not playing it that way. We're playing it my way. So Robb, the young wolf, showing a little bit of smarts here. Now, since we're on this one, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Battle of the Green Fork, which is the battle that is skipped over. This is how it goes in the book. Ground down. The mountain is there. We don't really see him here in the show, but I guess you can get the implication he's there. We just don't see him on screen. He commands the troops. Tyrion wears an assortment of armor pieces instead of his custom-made one, but I can see why they don't put that in this show. It's not really a big important one. He kills a horse for its unicorn helm. He gives a battle speech like he does here, and he leads the vanguard. He miraculously manages to survive by successfully fighting several enemy soldiers himself. He takes one of them prisoner. That's one big moment I remember. You don't expect Tyrion Lannister, being a dwarf in ill-fitting armor, to take a prisoner, but he does. And afterwards he tells his father that his plan to get him killed had failed. They kind of cut that out and have Tyrion in the show be like, "Oh, good of you to notice, father." Tywin reveals that he actually expected Tyrion and his hill tribesmen to run and retreat back to camp and hope to lure the Stark army with them into the trap and then go behind them. That was his feint. Now Tyrion, being unexpectedly brave, he foiled the plan, and of course the hill tribes charging in with the good weapons helped, and instead it caused the Starks to retreat. So he got a rout instead of a capture. So it's one of those things that objective failed successfully. And like I mentioned, they wanted to show it, but budgets. And another little thing is that in the show, Robb uses 2,000 men, which is 10% of his host. But in the book, it's a larger section of men, about 1,600. Excuse me, 16,000. And who are they commanded by? Roose Bolton. Now, I didn't put this in the notes, but apparently in IMDb he doesn't show up till next season, so I guess I forgot about his season 2 appearance. Now, they defeat about half of Tyrion's hill tribe forces, and they put up quite a fight, but they retreat as soon as he learns how many men the Lannisters have, and they suffer only moderate losses. Now, Roose being the one in command and all that, especially what he's going to do later in Book 3 in Season 3, has gotten a lot of fans wondering just how early on was Roose planning his treachery. Was it all the way back here? Now, considering the animosity between House Bolton and House Stark, I can kind of see it with the book that he was at least hedging his bets. Maybe him and Tywin were in communication already, or maybe Roose was doing this independently and then later they went into communication. One thing that would have been nice to see them include in the show, but I could kind of see why they cut it out. They could have at least mentioned that Roose Bolton was in command of the 2,000 men and him and a small force managed to retreat when they were routed. But it's one of those things that, it's a minor change. It's not bad, but if they had included it at least in dialogue, it would have made that so much stronger for the audience upon repeat viewing. And of course, would have been a nice little Easter egg for those who had already read the books and going to watch the show. But you know, what if? Now we come to King's Landing. Now these scenes are put sporadically throughout the episode, as it goes with a lot of the different plots. But Ned's is split here. He has another chat with Varys, which in the books, apparently that chat is all in one go. First show, I can kind of see why they split it up, but it makes you wonder, how often is he able to get in there? I know that is one of his personas to try to get in, but you would think someone would be like, that guy's spending an awful lot of time chatting with Stark and he's bringing him wine. I don't know, maybe there's something going on there. But then Varys has a way of getting what he wants with people, except for one thing we're going to see at the end of the episode. And Varys is bringing up, you should do it for the realm. And Ned is being stubborn at first, like, I'm not going to do it. You want me to go against everything? You want me to betray my friend's memory and all that? And Varys brings up, what about your daughter? The Lannisters have her. Now, they tone it down a bit here, but the implication is if Ned does not do what they want, they'll hurt her. I don't really fully get that implication in the show. Joffrey, obviously, yeah, but then again, it's Joffrey. But I don't think Cersei would kill Sansa outright unless she had to in the show. In the books, that's another thing. Cersei seems to be a little bit more evil in the books at this point. Later show Cersei, I could definitely see doing that. But this early, nah, I don't see her doing it. You can call me a sweet summer child on that, but it's just how it comes off here. Now Ned is sitting in the dungeon stewing on it. And he thinks, and that thing I mentioned earlier about love on one hand and duty on the other, you can imagine that something like that is going through his head. And eventually Ned decides to do what is right. Love, duty, what to do. And his main honor would be to, you know, keep what he was doing, but love and duty. Protect his children, protect the realm, keep bloodshed at a minimum. He decides to falsely confess his treason before gods and men. And considering everything in the backstory with Jon, it's not the first time he's done a lie like that. Going into his lived his lies thing. And that doesn't matter depending on which one you look at. R plus equals J, Ashar being the mother, someone else, no matter which way you look at it. And especially if you go in the whole little thing that he was already married when he married Kat, so the quote-unquote legitimate children are the bastards, and Jon's the legitimate one, whichever one you go. He has already lied before gods and men to do his duty and protect the people he loves. So it's a second one. But he does it begrudgingly because of how he is. And being someone that's very honor-specific, I can see why. Now, Arya sees this watching from the Baelor statue at the Sept. Now, an interesting thing about the Sept we see here, as it appears here, it was redesigned between this episode and the pilot. And if you watch it, you can definitely tell it's a little bit more grandiose in the pilot. Here, it's a little bit more simple in the wide shot. And here, it's an early design. And you see only the upper part in this episode. And we don't see what the full building looks like until a future episode called And Now His Watch Has Ended. Which I can kind of see why. They're not fully happy with the look. Like, yeah, it doesn't really look that Westerosi, that fantasy element. So they decided to only go with it. And they went with it. It works for this one. Now Ned gives his confession. And he's expected to be allowed to go to the Wall and live out his life with Jon. Which of course would tie back to what was said earlier. If Ned had been able to go to the Wall, he probably would have eventually been able to tell Jon the truth about his parentage. And since he's a member of the Night's Watch, it's not like they can do anything. Even if somehow Varys had learned and had told Tywin, why would Tywin do anything? He's a member of the Night's Watch, sworn to hold no lands, father no children. Even though when Ned's with him, it's like, yeah, they're just going to live out their lives on the Wall. And this whole scene, the tension, even though I knew what was coming from the first time I watched it due to all the spoilers, and I was on high guard, watching this, I'm like, you sob, seeing Joffrey go against the deal. Now, the thing that surprises me here is, if Cersei is Queen Regent, shouldn't she be able to easily nip this in the bud and be like, no, and then look directly at Sir Ilyn and do something? Or is Sir Ilyn just going to follow the king's words no matter what because there's no one else of equal authority saying anything? Now, you know, if Tywin was here, Joffrey would not have been able to do that, and if he had, he would have been like, no. Looked at Sir Ilyn and be like, no, and then he would have said something to Joffrey. Or Joffrey would not have been the one out there. Well, despite Ned's confession and everything from everyone else, Joffrey tells Sir Ilyn to bring him his head after he says as long as he's king, treachery will be met with blood. And I just love how everyone reacts here. Ned is like shocked, like this wasn't part of the deal, and then realization hitting on him. He's going through all the ones, and he's resigned to his fate at the end. Everyone trying to argue and beg with Joffrey. Sansa like, no! Cersei trying to go, no, Joffrey, this is not the way. And the one little detail I really do love here is even Varys rushes forward. He didn't rush forward when Ned's men were killed and he was taken hostage. But here he rushes forward to try to talk with Joffrey. Now part of that is that no matter what his back plans are with Mopatis, and he says he serves the realm, he already knows that killing Ned here will be stupid. It will cause way more bloodshed than any type of deal that they can broker from Ned going to the Wall and Robb bending the knee can broker. There might be some hostilities and maybe some little small skirmishes before everything's over, but nothing as major as what's about to happen. And he is right in that regard. Because this incident spurns everything that's going to happen throughout the next couple seasons in Westeros throughout the war. Because if they had managed to actually keep the deal intact, at least on the Westerosi side, the big grandiose war in its final form could have been avoided. The War of the Five Kings. We could have had at least a war of a couple other kings, because the other Baratheon brothers probably would have still rebelled. But this part could have been avoided. Ned's dead. They put his head on a spike. And that led to the War of the Five Kings. And that's quite a way to end it. Now, we don't actually see Ned's head fall, because, they would have to get an animatronic. But it's edited well. We see the sword come down. It cuts away. You hear the sound. You see the birds. And then we're going to see the last part of it in the next episode. And like I said at the top, add another trick to the Sean Bean dies and everything he appears in list. And sad that he confessed treason in front of everybody. Then he was still killed. Thank you, Joffrey. And for this stuff, if we hated Joffrey in this show already, this one seals it. So that note that I mentioned before that George sent him saying, "Congratulations, everybody hates you," this puts that final nail in the coffin of why we hate Joffrey. Although I will say it's kind of stupid that people confuse their hate for Joffrey with their hate for the actor. Some of them, at least. So it's one of those things, fictional characters. Am I getting through to you at all? And it's a nice way to end the penultimate episode. And all the fallout from this we're going to see in the next one, which will not only wrap up the season, but it will start the walk and march of the next season and all of its main storylines and plots. And of course, it's one of the ones that leaves you wanting more. And when I was first watching this, I was hooked before, but once I got to this episode and the follow-up, I was really hooked in it, and that's why I continued to marathon watch to it, and I could not wait for season 5. If I decide to review season 5 at the end of this whole thing, we'll talk about it when we get to it. But that is for another video. Till next time, guys.